The first rule of pediatric nursing at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, the one they never write in any manual, is that some children are more important than others. It was a rule Clara Stone was about to break, shatter, and grind into dust under the heel of her worn-out Danskos. The air in the North Wing was different. It was filtered, of course, just like everywhere else in the sprawling hospital complex, but it seemed to carry an extra, intangible weight. It was the pressure of expectation, the silent hum of power temporarily at rest. This was where the nation's elite came when their bodies betrayed them, and today, that elite was an 8-year-old boy with a love for dragons and a compromised respiratory system. Clara Stone moved through that weighted air with a practiced ease that belied the knot in her stomach. 12 years in nursing had taught her how to build walls, how to separate the clinical from the emotional, but walls had a way of crumbling around children, especially children like Leo Thompson. "Draw 4, Leo said, his voice a little raspy. He laid the card down on the overbed table with the triumphant flourish of a seasoned card sharp. A small, triumphant grin played on his lips, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all day. Clara feigned a dramatic gasp. "Leo! You wouldn't. Not to me. Not after I personally procured you that extra cup of cherry jello." "Rules are rules, Clara," he said, his smile widening. A faint wheeze hitched at the end of the sentence, a subtle reminder of why he was here. Severe asthma, triggered by a nasty virus, had landed the president's grandson in her care for a multi-day observation. She picked up her 4 cards with a sigh, adding them to the already unwieldy fan in her hand. "You're a ruthless man, Leo Thompson, a dragon in human form." He beamed at that. He'd spent the morning detailing the various types of dragons from his favorite book series, and she'd listened intently, asking questions about horde management and flame-retardant scales. It was easier than talking about the nebulizer treatments or the IV line taped expertly to his small hand. It was connection, the most potent medicine she could offer. Her job wasn't just to monitor his oxygen saturation and administer his albuterol. It was to make this sterile, intimidating room feel a little less like a cage. The door slid open with a soft, expensive hiss, and the weighted air in the room instantly grew heavier. Dr. Alistair Evans strode in, his posture as starched as his white coat. He was the head of pediatrics, a man who had climbed the career ladder with such ferocious speed that he seemed to have forgotten the people on the rungs below him. His eyes, small and sharp, flickered from the cards in Clara's hand to the grin on Leo's face, before settling on her with a look of cool disapproval. "Nurse Stone," he said, his voice a smooth, condescending baritone, "do you have a moment to spare from your recreational activities?" Clara felt a familiar flash of heat in her chest, but she stamped it down. She'd learned long ago that reacting to Evans was like playing chess with a pigeon. It would just knock over the pieces, strut around, and act like it won. She carefully placed her cards face down. "Of course, Doctor. I was just about to check Leo's vitals again." "See that you do," Evans said, turning his attention to the boy. His professional smile was a masterpiece of insincerity. "And how are we feeling, young man? Ready to get back to the White House and run circles around your grandfather?" Leo's smile faltered. He shrank back into his pillows, his eyes darting to the corner of the room where Secret Service Agent Harris stood, immobile and silent as a statue. Harris hadn't moved in 3 hours. He was a solid wall of dark suit, earpiece, and perpetual vigilance. He wasn't a comfort. He was a constant, unnerving reminder that Leo wasn't just a boy, but an asset. "I guess," Leo mumbled, picking at a loose thread on his blanket. Evans didn't seem to notice the change. He made a cursory check of the monitors, his movements efficient and impersonal. "His numbers are stable. The new corticosteroid regimen seems to be effective. Keep him on the scheduled nebulizer treatments, and page me if his O2 sats drop below 94%. And nurse," he added, turning back to Clara as he reached the door, "try to maintain a certain professional distance. The boy needs rest, not a playmate. We can't afford to get familiar." The door hissed shut behind him, leaving a chill in his wake. Familiar. The word hung in the air, clinical and cold. Clara wanted to tell him that familiarity, a kind word, a shared game, a moment of genuine human connection was precisely what a scared 8-year-old in a hospital bed needed. But it wouldn't matter. To men like Evans, patients were collections of symptoms and charts, and nurses were glorified functionaries. She looked at Leo, whose face had clouded over. Then she looked at Agent Harris, whose stony expression betrayed nothing, but whose eyes seemed to follow her every move with a cold, calculating assessment. He didn't trust her. He saw her rapport with the boy not as a comfort, but as a variable, a crack in the sterile security perimeter he was paid to maintain. She was an unpredictable element in his carefully controlled equation. Clara forced a bright smile back onto her face, picking up her cards. You know what? I think I have a wild card in here somewhere. Your dragon-like ruthlessness is about to be defeated by my superior nursing strategy. Leo looked up, a flicker of his earlier cheer returning to his eyes. He didn't need a functionary. He needed a friend. And if that put her at odds with the doctor, Evanses and Agent Harrises of the world, then so be it. Some things were more important than protocol. She settled into her chair, ready to lose the game, content in the knowledge that she was winning the only battle that truly mattered. Outside the thick, soundproofed windows of the VIP wing, the world hummed along, oblivious. But inside the room, the pieces were already on the board, and a clock had begun to tick. The first sign that the world was tilting off its axis was not a sound but a feeling, a subtle seismic shift in the hospital's rhythm. The steady, metronomic beat of footsteps in the hallway outside Leo's room faltered, replaced by a sudden, scurrying urgency. A cart rattled past, moving too fast. A distant, muffled shout cut through the usual hum. Clara was charting Leo's vitals, her pen scratching across the paper, when the feeling coalesced into a sound, a shrill, electronic shriek that clawed at the ears, followed by a calm, metallic voice from the hospital's PA system. The voice was stripped of all human inflection, which only made the words it spoke more terrifying. Code Silver, main lobby, Code Silver. The pen froze in Clara's hand. Code Silver. Active shooter. The two words every hospital worker drills for but prays they never hear. Her blood ran cold. Instantly, the room was a blur of motion. Agent Harris, no longer a statue, was a creature of pure, coiled energy. He spoke into his wrist, his voice a low, urgent growl. Castle is compromised. I say again, Castle is compromised. Initiate lockdown protocol now. He moved to the door, his hand already on the heavy magnetic lock mechanism. To Clara, he barked, Stay away from the windows. Get the boy on the floor, far side of the bed. This is the designated safe zone. Do not leave this room. Do you understand? His orders were clear, absolute. They were the product of hundreds of hours of training, of threat assessments, and contingency plans. In any other circumstance, Clara would have obeyed without question. But as Harris slammed the lock home, her eyes were drawn to the window. It was a large panoramic pane of reinforced glass, offering a sweeping view of the hospital's manicured grounds and the adjacent wing. Her training screamed at her to get down, to make herself small. But a flicker of movement on the rooftop across the way held her mesmerized. It wasn't the frantic movement of panic. It was something else. Something deliberate. Harris, wait, she said, her voice tight. On the floor, nurse, now. No, look, she insisted, pointing. The rooftop. Over there. Harris gave the window a cursory, dismissive glance. My team has eyes on every angle. The threat is internal. But Clara's eyes, trained to spot the smallest anomaly in a patient's breathing or a subtle shift in their pallor, saw what his security-focused gaze had missed. It wasn't just a maintenance worker. There were two figures. One was crouched near an air conditioning unit, the other was lying prone, and between them, something long and metallic rested on a bipod. As she watched, a tiny, sickening glint of light flashed off a lens, a scope. The blood drained from her face. The shooter wasn't just in the lobby. This was coordinated. A siege. And the designated safe room, this high-profile fishbowl with its panoramic view, wasn't a safe room at all. It was a target, a kill box. They're on the roof, she said, her voice trembling but firm. He has a rifle. They're watching this room. That's impossible, Harris snapped, his focus on the door, on the immediate known threat. We swept those rooftops an hour ago. Now get down. In that moment, Clara was faced with a choice that defied all training. Obey the man whose entire existence was dedicated to security, a man with access to information she couldn't imagine, or trust the terrifying evidence of her own eyes? She looked at Leo, who was now huddled at the foot of his bed, his small body shaking, his breathing already starting to hitch in that way that preceded a full-blown asthma attack. Protocol was a ghost. Orders were meaningless echoes. All that was real was the little boy in front of her and the glint of death in the window. We're moving, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. You will do no such thing, Harris roared, turning from the door, his face a mask of fury. You will endanger the protectee. Staying here will kill him, she shot back, her own voice raw with adrenaline. She didn't have time to explain, to persuade. She had to act. She scooped up Leo's emergency inhaler from the bedside table and grabbed the small, portable oxygen tank from its cradle on the wall. "Leo, honey," she said, her voice miraculously calm and steady. "We're going to play a new game. It's called Super Secret Hide and Seek, and we have to be the best hiders in the whole world, okay?" He looked up at her, his big eyes wide with terror, but he saw the unshakable certainty in her face and nodded, a tiny, jerky motion. He trusted her. Just as she slung the oxygen tank strap over her shoulder and took his hand, a volley of sharp cracks, closer this time, echoed from down the hall. Gunfire. Harris flattened himself against the wall by the door, his weapon drawn. His attention was divided, his carefully laid plans dissolving into chaos. "Stone, I am ordering you. Stay put," he yelled. But Clara was already moving. She pulled Leo toward a secondary door, one that led not to the main hall, but to a small, private kitchenette used for the VIPs. It was a longer, more dangerous route to anywhere else, but it was away from the windows, away from the sniper's gaze. She risked one last glance at Harris. He was staring at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and incandescent rage. He saw a hysterical nurse, a liability, a civilian who had shattered his protocol. He didn't see the threat she saw. He only saw her as another one. With Leo's small, cold hand clutched tightly in hers, Clara Stone slipped through the kitchenette door and disappeared into the bowels of the hospital, an act of insubordination that, she was certain, had just saved their lives. The basement smelled of damp concrete, dust, and the ghosts of old chemicals. It was a labyrinth of humming pipes and forgotten equipment, a world away from the sterile, brightly lit corridors above. For Clara, it was a memory map. During her first year as a resident, she'd gotten lost down here and had spent a frantic hour wandering before finding her way out, memorizing the maze-like layout in the process. She now navigated the dim corridors with a purpose that defied the terror clawing at her throat. She found what she was looking for: a heavy steel door, unmarked and coated in a layer of grime. Linen supply, Wing C. A forgotten relic from before the hospital's modernization. She knew from her accidental exploration years ago that it was a dead end, a concrete box that was no longer in use. It was perfect. The door groaned open on protesting hinges. Inside, the air was thick and stale. Metal shelves, empty save for a few fossilized, yellowed sheets, lined the walls. It was small, windowless, and solid. A tomb, a sanctuary. "Okay, champ," she whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the small space. "This is the super secret base. No one will ever find us here." She guided Leo to the far corner, settling him down on a dusty but folded blanket she found on a shelf. His breathing was shallow, rapid. The wheezing was more pronounced. "Is this part of the game?" he asked, his voice tiny. "The most important part," she said, her hands already working, attaching the small mask from the portable oxygen tank to his face. "The part where the heroes wait for the right moment to save the day." She kept her voice light, her movements calm, a desperate performance of normalcy for an audience of one. As the hiss of oxygen filled the small mask, she saw the frantic terror in his eyes begin to recede, replaced by a weary trust. He believed in her. She had to be worthy of that belief. She wedged a heavy, discarded metal stool under the door handle, a flimsy barricade that was more for her own peace of mind than for any real security. Then she sat on the floor beside Leo, pulling him close, and began to tell him a story about a young dragon who had to hide in a deep cave to protect a magical jewel. As she spoke, her mind was racing, listening to the muffled, distant sounds of chaos from the world above, praying she had made the right choice. She was a nurse. Her entire life was about to protecting, healing, and preserving life. And yet, she had the sinking feeling that her own life, as she knew it, was already over. Meanwhile, in the makeshift command center set up in the hospital's security hub, life was anything but over. It was a whirlwind of frantic energy. Screens flickered with camera feeds, and the air crackled with overlapping radio transmissions. The narrative of the Code Silver had taken a sharp, horrifying turn. Agent Harris stood before a bank of monitors, his face pale with fury. His protectee was in the wind, a catastrophic failure that would end his career. But it was worse than that. He hadn't just lost him. The boy had been taken. "She's gone." He clipped into his radio, the words tasting like ash. "Nurse Clara Stone has abducted the protectee from the secure location." Dr. Alistair Evans, who had been evacuated to the command center, along with other senior staff, saw his opening. This was more than just a crisis. It was an opportunity. I warned you about her, Agent Harris, he said, his voice slick with manufactured concern. She's always been headstrong, an authority problem. I'm not entirely surprised she would crack under pressure. He conveniently omitted the fact that Clara's file was spotless, filled with commendations for her calm competence. A police SWAT captain named Miller, a man with a jaw like a block of granite and eyes that had seen too much, turned from his tactical map. Abducted? Or is she just a panicked civilian trying to hide? She disobeyed a direct federal order, Harris retorted, his voice rising. She took the boy and ran. There was no immediate threat in that room. The shooter was contained in the lobby. She is an unknown variable. In this situation, any unknown variable is treated as a threat. End of story. The lie was subtle. He didn't know for sure that there was no other threat. But admitting a nurse might have seen something his trained eyes missed was an impossibility. His pride, his career depended on his version of events being the only one. Evans piled on, his words carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. She has a history of insubordination, questioning treatment protocols, going over my head to the patient's family. She has a hero complex. It's entirely possible she's delusional, thinking she's rescuing the boy. The false narrative began to solidify, hardening into accepted fact with each telling. On the tactical radio net, Captain Miller's voice was grim. All units be advised. We have a secondary situation. The president's grandson has been taken by a hospital employee. Female, 30s, scrubs, name is Clara Stone. Consider her unstable and a potential threat to the child. We are tracking her on internal security feeds now. A technician pointed to a grainy screen. Got her. Level B2, South Corridor. Looks like she went into an old service closet. Seal the basement, Miller commanded. No one in or out. We'll clear the primary threat upstairs, then we converge on her. I want a negotiator on standby, and get me everything you have on this nurse. Family, friends, psychological history. I want to know who I'm dealing with. The machine of authority was now fully engaged, its gears grinding with terrifying efficiency. Every piece of information, every order, was predicated on a single, fundamentally flawed assumption that Clara Stone was the enemy. To the men in that room staring at maps and screens, she was no longer a compassionate nurse. She was a suspect, a rogue element, a problem to be neutralized. The rage bait was set. The audience to this silent, unfolding drama, the universe itself, perhaps knew the truth. They knew she was huddled in a dark, musty room, whispering stories to a frightened child, her only weapon an oxygen tank and her own courage. But in the command center, under the cold, fluorescent lights, her heroism was being expertly, maliciously reframed as a crime. And the full weight of the law was about to come crashing down on her. The silence in the linen closet was the first thing to break. For an hour, it had been a protective shroud, broken only by Clara's soft voice and the gentle hiss of Leo's oxygen. Now, the silence was ripped apart by the heavy, thudding rhythm of combat boots on concrete, growing closer and closer. Leo, who had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, startled awake. His eyes shot open, wide with fear. Clara put a finger to her lips, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The footsteps stopped directly outside their door. A harsh, metallic scraping sound followed as someone tried the handle. It held, thanks to the stool she'd wedged beneath it. A heavy fist banged on the steel door, the sound cannonading through the small space. "Clara Stone! This is the police! We know you're in there!" The voice was deep, amplified by a bullhorn, distorted and inhuman. "Open this door! Now!" Clara flinched, pulling Leo tighter against her. This wasn't a rescue. This was an assault. They sounded angry, aggressive. Why? "They're here to help us," Leo whimpered, his face buried in her scrubs. "Shh. It's okay," she whispered, her mind racing. Something was profoundly wrong. They weren't speaking to her like she was a victim who needed saving. They were speaking to her like she was a perpetrator. Another voice joined the first, this one horribly familiar. It was Dr. Evans, his tone oozing a poisonous, false sincerity. "Clara, this is Dr. Evans. Listen to me. The danger has passed. The hospital is secure. You've done a great job keeping Leo safe, but it's time to come out now. Don't make this any worse for yourself." Worse for yourself. The words sent a chill down her spine. The threat was clear. She had to protect Leo. Not just from the shooters, but from whatever this was. From the chaos of a dozen armed men bursting through the door. She couldn't risk him getting hurt, or his fragile lungs filling with whatever dust and debris a forced entry would kick up. She crawled to the door, her body trembling. "Is the boy's mother there?" she called out, her voice much shakier than she wanted. "I will open the door when I can speak to his mother. I need to hand him over calmly." There was a pause. Then the bullhorn voice, Captain Miller's, crackled again. "We are not playing games, Stone. You are not in a position to make demands. You have 5 minutes to open this door, or we will open it for you." Demands? She wasn't making demands. She was trying to ensure a safe transfer for a medically fragile, terrified child. They weren't listening. They weren't thinking. They were operating from a script she didn't understand, one in which she had already been cast as the villain. The cold, clipped tones of Agent Harris cut through the air next, sharp and lethal. "Stone, you are interfering with a federal operation and endangering a protectee of the United States Secret Service. Every second you keep that door closed is another felony charge. Open it. Felony charge." The words hit her like a physical blow. They thought she'd committed a crime. The injustice of it was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. She had seen a threat they'd missed. She had shielded this child with her own body, comforted him, kept him breathing, and this was her reward. To be cornered in a basement and treated like a terrorist? A wave of righteous fury washed over her, momentarily drowning out the fear. "Leo Thompson is safe with me!" she yelled, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. "He is stable, but he is anxious and asthmatic. I will not subject him to a violent entry. You will stand down, and you will get his mother on the phone, or we will wait here until you do." She was drawing a line. It was probably a foolish, reckless line to draw against men with guns and the full force of the government behind them, but it was the only line she had. Her duty of care to her patient superseded everything else. It superseded their orders, their threats, their catastrophic misunderstanding of the situation. Inside the closet, Leo was crying softly now, the sounds muffled by her shoulder. She held him, rocking gently, whispering reassurances she didn't feel. Outside the door, the men who were supposed to be heroes were planning how to break down the door to get to the woman who actually was one. The standoff was absolute. The frustration was incandescent. Clara Stone, the nurse, was alone, armed with nothing but her principles, holding off the confused and angry might of a system that had failed, and was now determined to blame her for it. The 5-minute clock was ticking. The end did not come with a negotiated surrender. It came with the violent, screeching grind of metal on metal. They hadn't bothered to breach the door. A maintenance worker with a master key had simply overridden the old lock. The stool she'd propped against the handle was flung across the room as the door burst inward. Light flooded the small, dark space, blinding her. She instinctively shielded Leo, turning her back to the door, making her body a barrier. The room was instantly filled with men in black tactical gear, rifles raised, red laser dots dancing on her back. The air filled with harsh, overlapping shouts. "Hands! Show me your hands! Get away from the boy!" Before she could even process the commands, rough hands grabbed her. She was hauled to her feet and spun around, her arms wrenched behind her back. A coarse plastic zip tie was cinched brutally tight around her wrists. A flicker of movement caught her eye, Agent Harris, his face like thunder, striding past her to scoop up a crying Leo. He didn't even look at her. "The suspect is secure," someone barked into a radio. "Suspect." The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the closet. They had won. They had rescued the boy from the one person who had kept him safe. As 2 SWAT officers pulled her from the room and Frog marched her down the basement corridor, she saw the smirking, triumphant face of Dr. Evans. He gave her a small, satisfied nod, the look of a man who had just seen a nettlesome problem neatly solved. That was the moment the true, soul-crushing weight of her situation crashed down upon her. She wasn't taken to a debriefing room. She was taken to an interrogation room. It was a cold, windowless conference room, repurposed for the occasion. She was seated at one end of a long, polished table, her hands still bound behind her back. Across from her sat Dr. Evans, Agent Harris, Captain Miller, and a stern-faced woman in a suit who introduced herself as the hospital's chief legal counsel. The humiliation was methodical, relentless. They didn't ask her what she had seen. They didn't ask her why she had run. They told her what she had done. "Your actions today demonstrated a catastrophic lack of judgment," the lawyer began, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You endangered a child, obstructed a federal investigation, and caused a significant diversion of tactical resources." "I saw a sniper," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "On the roof across from Leo's room." The window was exposed. Agent Harris scoffed, a short, ugly sound. A secondary threat on an adjacent rooftop was identified and neutralized within 10 minutes of the initial alarm. My team had it handled. What you did was introduce a new, unnecessary crisis into an already volatile situation. You went rogue. You panicked, Dr. Evans added, leaning forward. He was enjoying this. You took a stable patient, removed him from a state-of-the-art medical suite, and hid him in a filthy, non-sterile closet. His anxiety, exacerbated by your reckless behavior, could have triggered a fatal asthma attack. Did you consider that, Nurse Stone? They twisted everything. Her clear-headed assessment of a threat became panic. Her protection of a child became endangerment. Her attempt to ensure a safe handover became the delusional demands of a hostage-taker. They interrogated her for an hour, their questions circling, trapping her. Why didn't she trust the authorities? Why did she think her judgment was superior to trained federal agents? Did she have a history of challenging authority? Dr. Evans supplied the answer to that one himself. Her file shows a pattern of creative interpretation of hospital policy. He purred, lying with the effortless ease of a sociopath. Finally, after she had been drained of all fight, all hope, Captain Miller stood up. For now, you're free to go. But you are not to leave the state. A formal investigation is underway. I expect we'll be speaking again. The final indignity was administered by Dr. Evans. He walked around the table and stood before her. Clara, given the circumstances, the board has no choice but to place you on immediate and indefinite suspension. You'll need to turn in your badge and ID. A security guard came in and cut the zip tie from her wrists, the plastic having dug deep red grooves into her skin. He waited as she numbly slid her ID lanyard from around her neck and placed it on the polished table. It felt like she was laying a piece of her soul down. Everything she had worked for, everything she was encapsulated in that little plastic card. She was escorted out by the guard, not through the main entrance, but through a rear service exit, like a piece of trash being taken out. The walk was a blur of averted gazes and whispered conversations from colleagues who had already heard the twisted version of the day's events. No one met her eye. She was no longer Clara, the competent, caring nurse. She was a pariah, a hero who had been tried, convicted, and sentenced by the very people she had helped, all before the adrenaline had even fully left her system. The night air was cold, a stark contrast to the stuffy, suffocating atmosphere of the hospital. It did nothing to clear her head. Clara stood on the curb by the service exit, a ghost in her own life. The city lights of Bethesda blurred through the tears she refused to let fall. Her car was in the employee lot a half-mile away, a walk that felt like crossing a continent. Her career was over. Her name was ruined. She might be facing prison. And for what? For trusting her gut. For doing her job. For protecting a child. A hollow, aching despair settled deep in her bones. A sleek black SUV, the kind that normally melts into the background of motorcades, detached itself from the curb down the street and glided to a silent stop directly in front of her. The windows were tinted to an impenetrable black. She assumed it was more security, perhaps coming to take her in for more questioning. She braced herself, a fresh wave of exhaustion washing over her. But instead of a grim-faced agent, the rear passenger window slid down with a faint whir. Inside, bathed in the soft glow of an interior light, was a face the entire world would recognize. First Lady Elizabeth Thompson sat there, her expression not one of accusation or anger, but of deep, profound concern. Her eyes, which looked so much warmer and kinder in person than they did on television, met Clara's. "Nurse Stone," the First Lady said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the fog of Clara's despair. "Get in. My son told me everything." It took a moment for the words to register. Numbly, Clara opened the heavy car door and slid onto the plush leather seat. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence, shutting out the world that had just chewed her up and spat her out. The First Lady looked at her, really looked at her, with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply validating. "He told me about the game you played. He told me how you made him feel safe when he was scared. He also told me you saw the bad man in the other window before the suit men did." Clara could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. "I just got off the phone with the director of the Secret Service," Elizabeth Thompson continued, her voice hardening with an edge of steel Clara had not expected. "I explained to him that while protocol is important, a mother's instinct and the instinct of a good nurse, it seems, is sometimes better. Agent Harris is being reassigned to a desk in Anchorage, where he can contemplate the variables of frostbite. Dr. Evans is facing a full conduct review by the hospital board, an inquiry which I will be personally observing. And you, she paused, reaching out and placing a hand gently on Clara's arm, will be receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom next month. Some people are trained to follow orders. Others are brave enough to do what's right. Thank you, Clara, for doing what was right for my son. The lump in Clara's throat finally broke. A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or despair. It was a tear of vindication. The weight that had been pressing down on her, crushing the very air from her lungs, suddenly lifted. In the quiet, armored sanctuary of the waiting car, the hero of the story was finally being recognized.